I never thought silence could be louder than gunfire. After deployments that stretched into years, after surgeries that stitched me back together more times than I can count, after the countless nights I laid awake listening for mortars, or tracing the faces of brothers I buried too soon, all it took to unravel me was one message on a glowing screen. Just one line from my father. "Don't bother coming this Christmas. We decided it's best you stay away this year. No, how are you? No, we miss you. No, can't wait to see you." Just a sentence that read like a severance notice from the people who were supposed to love me without conditions. My name is Rachel Monroe. I am 32 years old, a woman who once believed she could endure anything if she wore enough armor, if she carried enough weight for others, if she kept forgiving, no matter how deep the cuts went. I've walked through fire and deserts, but nothing compared to that message glowing in the dark of my one-bedroom apartment in Fayetteville. I sat there staring at the blinking Christmas lights I had strung across my window, fragile bulbs trying to impersonate warmth, and I wondered what I had done to deserve being locked out of my own family's heart. It's strange the military teaches you to switch emotions off like a light when the mission demands it. I had mastered that skill on battlefields where grief was a luxury and hesitation could kill. Yet that night when my father's words lit up my phone, they struck harder than any explosion. They didn't just reject me, they erased me. My mother didn't call to soften the blow. My brother Tyler didn't send so much as a question mark. It was as if they had all agreed to banish me, to exile me quietly, right before the holidays, as if I were some liability they had finally decided to write off. I typed one word back: fine. And I meant it. Not the kind of fine that hides hurt waiting for someone to ask again. No, this was the final kind of fine. The kind that means you will not get another chance to wound me. The kind that means a door has been shut and welded closed. I deleted the airline ticket I had bought 3 weeks earlier, a round trip meant to deliver me back to the family table, and instead, I poured myself a glass of red wine. I raised it to the air, to the empty room, to the ghosts of what family was supposed to be. To family, I whispered bitterly, the word sour on my tongue. 5 days later, my phone buzzed with 10 missed calls. One from Tyler, one from my father, 4 from my mother, and one from their lawyer. The last one made my heart pause, because by then it was too late. Too late to undo what they had written. Too late to recall the letter I had already mailed. They thought, like always, that I would come crawling back hungry for scraps of affection, eager to forgive, ready to shoulder their disappointments. But they didn't know me anymore. They didn't realize that the girl who had left in uniform was gone. I had come home carrying a different kind of armor, and they were about to learn just how dangerous a daughter can be when she finally stops begging for her father's love. Let me take you back before that silence, before the text, before betrayal hardened into something sharp and unmovable. I was 18 when I enlisted. Most girls my age were packing for college dorms or dreaming about love. I was packing duffel bags heavy with gear and goodbyes. At graduation, while other fathers wrapped their daughters in proud embraces, mine just muttered, "Try not to embarrass yourself out there." That was his version of affection criticism wrapped in a sneer. I didn't sign those papers to make him proud. I signed because I needed to believe I was worth something, because home had never felt safe. Not with his eyes on me like I was some accident he regretted. I fought my way to sergeant, earning stripes with sweat and scars. That Christmas when I flew home, desperate for even a sliver of acknowledgement. Do you know what my father said? Not congratulations. Not we're proud. He shoved a shovel in my hands and told me to clear the driveway before I even took my boots off. My mother hovered in the background like a shadow, wringing her hands, whispering, "Just don't make him angry." She was a ghost of the mother I needed, present but powerless. And Tyler. He had learned early that siding with Dad meant survival, so he followed him like a loyal shadow. So I played my part. I was the good soldier daughter. I called on birthdays. I sent flowers on anniversaries. When the roof leaked or the car broke down, I mailed checks even when those checks came from combat pay earned in sand and blood. They never asked where the money came from, never asked what it cost me. They just cashed the envelope, sometimes sent back a thumbs up emoji, sometimes not even that. And still, every year I hoped that one Christmas I would walk in and just for one evening feel like I belonged. But hope can be cruel. This year was supposed to be different. I had my discharge papers in hand, a modest pension to keep me afloat, and a heart so weary it ached for rest. I wanted to bake cookies with Mom. I wanted to hear Tyler talk about his new job. I wanted just once for Dad to place a hand on my shoulder and say, "I'm glad you're home." Instead, I got that text, that brutal final dismissal, and in the ruins of that rejection, something shifted inside me. Because here's the twist: 5 years ago, during one of my rare leaves, Dad had asked me to co-sign something for the house. A second mortgage. I was barely 25, bone-tired, desperate for his approval, so I signed without reading the fine print. A technicality, he called it. Back then, I thought it meant he trusted me. I didn't realize what it truly meant until after his message detonated something cold in me. Out of distraction, I dug through old military email archives and found the digital copy. There it was, my signature, his stamped and witnessed. And buried in the legal language was a clause: if the borrower defaulted or voluntarily transferred, the cosigner assumed controlling interest over the property. Controlling interest. I sat back stunned. He thought he had cut me out, but on paper I wasn't just his daughter. I was majority owner of the house he worshipped, the house he told me I wasn't welcome in. Suddenly, poetic justice tasted sweet on my tongue. That house wasn't just his pride and joy. Legally, it was mine. That night, I called a lawyer I knew from base, a real estate specialist. I asked a hypothetical question, my voice steady though, my heart raced. What happens if a cosigner with majority interest is told not to come home anymore? The lawyer chuckled softly, not realizing how loaded my words were. Well, he said if she wanted to, she could take control of the property. So I drafted a letter, calm, polite, formal. No emotion, no theatrics. Just the facts, effective immediately. I would be exercising my controlling interest as co-signer and legal partial owner of the property at 12 Winmere Lane. All legal rights and responsibilities would now be enacted through council. I mailed it, certified old-fashioned, so that they would have to open it together, so they would feel the weight of the paper in their hands. And then I did something uncharacteristic. I chose peace for myself. I rented a cabin in the Smoky Mountains, far from them, where the snow fell gently against wooden eaves and the fireplace crackled with honest warmth. I turned off my phone. I let the silence settle over me like a blanket. For once, Christmas wasn't about them. It was about me. When I turned my phone back on days later, their frantic calls flooded in. Tyler's voice on the voicemail, panicked, defensive. Their lawyer, Harold Wells, speaking with false calm, but unable to hide the edge of desperation. And for the first time, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to hurt them the way they had hurt me. But because for once, I held the power. For once, I wasn't the invisible daughter begging for crumbs. For once, I was the one they needed. I took a slow breath as I replayed the messages one by one, letting the desperation in their voices sink in. Tyler had always been the messenger, the middleman who carried Dad's fury and Mom's pleas, trying to wrap them in softer words. But there was no softness in his voice this time. It cracked and stumbled like a boy caught between loyalty and fear. Rach, what the hell is this? Dad's freaking out, talking about lawyers and eviction notices. What are you doing? I stared out the frosted cabin window at the snow-dusted pines, their branches heavy with silence. My coffee steamed in my hand, warming the fingers that once steadied rifles. I answered him in the calmest tone I could manage, a tone the army had drilled into me when chaos raged. I'm executing my rights, Ty. Just like Dad executed his decision to tell me not to come home. There was a pause on his end, the kind that screams disbelief. You can't be serious. Over a stupid text. You're really going to take it this far? That word stupid burned. Stupid. As though the text that shattered me, that reduced a decade of sacrifice into a single dismissal, was nothing more than a careless mistake. I clenched my jaw. No, Tyler, I'm not kicking them out. Not yet. I let the words hang deliberate and sharp. He sputtered into the phone, but I didn't give him more. Here's the thing about people who hurt you over and over: they never really believe you'll fight back. They rely on your silence, your endless hope for crumbs, your desperate need to belong. My family had lived off that silence for years, turning it into currency. But I didn't need crumbs anymore. I had a contract. And for the first time in my life, I had power. The next call came from their lawyer, Harold Wells. He tried for casual, that slow, condescending rhythm men use when they think they can soothe you into compliance. Miss Monroe, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Your letter arrived rather abruptly and understandably caused a bit of alarm. I interrupted him before he could weave another careful excuse. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Wells. The documents are valid. I have the original. My counsel has reviewed them. I'm invoking control. The silence that followed was delicious. A beat then, too. I could almost hear him recalculating, riffling through papers, weighing how much he could bluff. Finally, his voice shifted lower, cautious. Well, I'm sure we can work something out. Perhaps a buyout, a reassignment of the note. That's when it clicked. They weren't scrambling because of me. They were scrambling because Dad had defaulted again, missed payments. Probably thought he could charm the bank or bully them into leniency, just like he bullied us at home. But now he wasn't staring down a faceless institution. He was staring down me, his daughter, his soldier, his majority owner, his worst nightmare wrapped in the very bloodline he had tried to cast out. I leaned back, savoring the moment. I'm open to discussion, I said evenly, but my first condition is that he calls me himself. Not through you, not through Tyler. I want him to ask. The line went so quiet I wondered if it had dropped. But no, Harold understood. He knew what I was doing. This wasn't about the house. It never had been. It was about acknowledgement. About finally making my father speak to me, not as a shadow, not as a mistake, but as someone he couldn't ignore. When I hung up, the fire crackled beside me. There was no tree in that cabin, no stockings, no smell of cinnamon or roasted ham. But there was peace. A peace I had earned with scars, with silence, with every rejection that had forged me harder. They didn't know it yet, but I was done being the soldier daughter who filled the gaps they left. I was the landlord now. And Christmas was about to get very, very uncomfortable. On Christmas morning, the call came from my mother. Her voice shook like a kettle rattling on the edge of boil. Rachel, please, don't do this. Your father's furious. He hasn't slept. Tyler's barely speaking. Can't we just move past it? Move past it. I almost laughed. Do you remember what he texted me? Mom. Silence. He told me not to come home for Christmas. Not this year, not next year, not ever. Do you know what that does to someone who's been deployed for nearly a decade? Who sent checks from war zones, who never missed a call, a card, a birthday. She whimpered, trying to protest, but I pushed on. Do you remember my 26th birthday? I was in a desert, Mom. Ambushed on a dirt road outside Kabul. When I finally got back to base alive by some miracle, I called you. Do you remember what you said? Her breath caught. I don't. You said, well, I'm glad you're safe, but don't talk about that around your father. It makes him anxious. And there it was. The truth I had swallowed for years. I wasn't their daughter. I was their inconvenience. A ghost they only tolerated when I was invisible, when my sacrifices could be boxed away unseen. Mom, I said softly, though steel lined every word. I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing it because I finally realized I was never going to be welcomed back unless I brought something to the table. She broke then, sobbing raw, helpless sobs that cracked through the line. She begged me to reconsider, begged me to stop this spiral. But I didn't cave, not this time. Because what she didn't know was that the legal paperwork was already filed. A notice of possession change, scheduled for delivery that very afternoon. And the cherry on top, I'd hired a property management company run by a fellow veteran to take over operations. They were scheduled for inspection the next day. Not to throw anyone out, not yet. Just to make it clear this was no longer their home. I wrapped myself in a thick sweater, sat by the fire, and watched the flames dance. No gifts under the tree. No family around the table. But for the first time there was justice. There was control. It tasted sweeter than any carol. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my property manager. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice you trust in a storm. "Hey, Rach. We did the walkthrough. Your folks weren't thrilled, but we kept it civil just like you said." My breath caught. "How bad is it?" He exhaled heavily. "Cosmetically not terrible. Structurally, leaks in the basement, mold spots under the windows, unfinished attic reno. And, get this, 2 of the 3 bedrooms have tenants. College kids, maybe. Looks like cash deals, no paperwork." I froze. They had rented out rooms behind my back, turned my legal property into a side hustle, all while texting me I wasn't welcome. My stomach twisted, not with rage, but insult. They had erased me so completely that even my name on the deed wasn't enough to stop them from profiting off what was mine. That night, I drafted a second letter. This one wasn't polite. Effective January 2nd, they would be given formal 30-day notice of management transition and possible termination of residency. Their subleases were illegal. Rent collection suspended. The property was under investigation for code violations. All communication would now go through legal counsel. I signed it with my full name and military rank: Rachel Monroe, Sergeant First Class U.S. Army, retired. Legal co-owner, 12 Windmere Lane. I sent it to Harold, their lawyer. Then I texted Tyler just 3 words: "Check your mailbox." Within the hour, the voicemail started again, pleading, panicked. Even my father's voice cracked through the machine, sharp with fear and fury. But I didn't listen, not one word. Because there's a moment every soldier knows. The second your boot hits soil after a battle and you realize you survived. In that silence, there's a surge of power so pure it hums in your bones. That's what I felt now. They could scream, they could cry, they could beg, but I had survived them. And now they were the ones living under my rules in my house. And come January, they would learn what it feels like to be unwelcome. Not out of pettiness, not out of revenge, but because I no longer needed a seat at their table. I owned the entire damn dining room. January arrived like a blade of cold steel, sharp and unavoidable. The second came with a sky heavy with snow, the kind that presses silence into the earth, muting every sound except the crunch beneath your boots. I didn't go alone that day. I brought my property manager, a locksmith, and a clipboard full of documentation. My uniform was long folded away, but I chose my armor carefully, a dark wool coat, boots polished until they gleamed, and my army dog tags around my neck. I wasn't there for theatrics. I was there for legitimacy, for closure. The driveway of 12 Windmere Lane was clogged with 3 cars, 2 of which I didn't recognize. Strangers parked in my driveway. That detail hit harder than I expected. For years, I had imagined pulling into this house as if it were still mine, stepping onto the porch, hearing the familiar creak of the wooden steps. Now it felt foreign, infested with lives I had never been invited to witness. Dad opened the door. His face was flushed, crimson sweat beading on his forehead, despite the bitter air. "Rachel, what the hell is this circus?" His voice was the same as always, barking, commanding, desperate to own the room before anyone else could. I didn't answer. Not immediately. I walked past him, my boots deliberate against the hardwood floor. My house, my terms. Mom appeared at the base of the staircase, clutching a rosary she rarely touched unless she wanted to be seen as pious. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Tyler sat on the couch, pale and deflated, his eyes avoiding mine. I took a long breath, steadying myself. My voice had to be calm, factual. This is a legal transition of ownership and management. As of this morning, all rights associated with this house fall under my direct control. You have 30 days to make a decision, formalize your tenancy under my contract, or relocate. Dad erupted, as predictable as thunder after lightning. "Locate. You can't do this. This is our home." I turned to him, my words clipped, each one a strike. "No, it's my investment." His face contorted, his hands shaking as he pointed at me. "I built this place with my own hands, and you defaulted on it," I replied coldly. "You signed it over to a 24-year-old in uniform just so you could salvage your reputation with the bank." That silenced him. The truth always did, at least for a moment. I could almost hear his pride fracture like glass under strain. I scanned the living room, the same room I used to sneak into as a teenager when the fights got too loud upstairs. The mantel where my boot camp photo once stood was bare, scrubbed of me like I had never existed. In its place sat decorations I didn't recognize, pieces of someone else's story written over mine. I felt a hollow ache deep in my chest, but I pressed on. The illegal tenants have already been notified, I continued. If they aren't gone in 10 days, I'll file trespassing charges. And if anyone here attempts to intimidate, damage, or interfere with this process, I will pursue criminal charges. Mom's lips quivered as she stepped forward, clutching her rosary tighter. Her voice cracked. But where will we go? I locked eyes with her, my own steady, unwavering. I don't know, Mom. Maybe not home for Christmas. The words hung in the air like ice. She broke, sobbing, the sound raw and guttural. Tyler stood, then his mouth opening, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, but I lifted a hand. I don't need words, Tyler. I needed them 10 years ago. Now I need boundaries. The locksmith moved past me, silent and efficient, changing the code on the front door, while my family stood frozen in disbelief. The metallic clicks of his tools were louder than any argument, louder than Dad's clenched fists or Mom's sobs. Each turn of the wrench was a declaration this house was mine, now not theirs. As I walked out into the biting air, snow crunching under my boots, I inhaled deeply. The air smelled clean, sharp, like something reborn. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the daughter begging for scraps. I felt like a woman who had come back stronger than they ever imagined. They could call it cold. I called it survival. The final notice expired on January 31st. No standoffs, no screaming last-minute calls. Just silence, the kind that follows when people finally realize you aren't bluffing anymore. On February 1st, I returned with a new key in hand. The house was empty. No note, no goodbye. Just hollow echoes in rooms that had once been filled with everything I thought I wanted. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, tracing ghosts. In Tyler's old room, a duffel bag tag from some ski trip I'd never been invited to. In the living room, a deep scratch carved across the hardwood where the coffee table once sat. The table I'd bought with my first deployment check at 19, the one they claimed was the family's when it was always mine. I stared at that scar for a long time, not angry, just aware of how damage lingers when no one sees you bleed. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the back door, letting the cold wind surge through the rooms. The winter sun spilled in, touching walls that no longer belonged to them, walls that finally recognized me. This wasn't revenge, not really. It was restoration. Restoration of boundaries, of dignity, of a name they had tried to erase. I transformed the house, not into a shrine to my pain, but into something new, something healing. Transitional housing for female veterans. Women like me who had come home to rejection, to silence, to families who didn't know how to love us once we were changed by the uniform. We called it the Monroe House. Reporters came sniffing after a local paper ran the story, a veteran reclaiming her home from the family that cast her out. They wanted scandal, juicy betrayal. But I didn't give them the full truth. Because this was never about humiliating my family. It was about saving myself. About making sure no woman like me would ever stand in the snow outside her own home unwanted and feel as alone as I once had. So when people ask, was it worth it? I smile. I smile because the answer is simple, more than they'll ever understand. I don't visit them. They don't call. But every Christmas now, I light a single candle on the porch of the Monroe house. Not for them, for me. For the girl who once stood outside this house in the snow, exiled. She found her way back, and she made sure that no one like her would ever stand alone again. And that is the story of how I came home. If you've listened this far, it means you understand pain, betrayal, survival in your own way. If my story reached you, if it made you feel seen, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need strength, and subscribe so you can hear more stories like mine. Leave a comment. I want to know your story too. Because in the end, that's what this is all about. Not revenge, not even justice, but connection. The connection we build when we dare to speak the truths that almost broke us.